hopefully you can see we have our next guest presenter here, Adam Auerbach from EPAM. And Adam and I will be kind of having a little conversation here around things that are of interest for the topic for both healthcare, but also just software delivery as a whole and how test strategy fits into that. I think maybe before we get going, Adam, would you mind just introducing yourself to the audience and just talking about a little bit about your experiences as it relates both to software delivery and then also with just healthcare in general?
Yeah, so thanks, Ryan and Sauce for having me. So my name is Adam Auerbach. I am the co-head of what we call our Cloud and Dev Test SecOps at EPAM. So EPAM is a consulting company with strong Eastern European ties, but we're across the globe. And as part of being the co-head of this practice, I'm specifically responsible for the global testing practice. So primarily my job is working with clients across all domains and helping them achieve their quality initiatives, whether that's helping accelerate automation or driving transformation, or moving to the cloud or DevOps. So I have a lot of experience talking to healthcare companies specifically about improving their testing practices. I've been with EPAM for 3 years now. Before joining EPAM, I was at Capital One, and I helped Capital One transform their testing practice and implement DevOps and eventually get to continuous testing and continuous delivery. I do also speak a lot at Star East and Star West about testing and DevOps and driving testing transformations. And I also blog, and you can follow me on Twitter at Bugman31.
That's a good name. I like that, Bugman. Unfortunately, the 31st person, though, you got to get to the first person who would be Bugman.
The 31 is because I played hockey growing up and in college,
nice.
And so, but there was already a Bugman taken, so I had to add the number.
Definitely want to come back to the hockey thing in a little bit because I miss my hockey right now. But anyway, get back to the point of the topic at hand. So given that we're surrounded by customers in the healthcare industry, I thought maybe it'll be interesting just to see from your point of view, what's top of mind for customers in that industry as it relates to just in general software delivery and how testing can kind of fit into that. What are you seeing out there?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about getting faster. With healthcare, you have a lot of COTS products, off-the-shelf products, third-party products that companies are using, as well as a lot of legacy systems. And so with COVID, that's really, I think, accelerated people's journey to the cloud as well as like just the digitization of their engineering practices in order to get products to market faster. And so we're talking to companies about how to help improve testing, how to, granted, there are some limitations based off of the legacy application or the COTS product that they're using, but how does testing get better, right? We've always talked about test automation and how that can create efficiencies, but a lot of times, healthcare clients are somewhat limited, or even just the approach that they've put in place for automation is somewhat lagging when you consider a more digitally native company or application where automation is part of the CI process. They're able to automate across the different layers of the application. A lot of healthcare clients have minimized the role of testing. So they used low-cost testers because they don't value testing that much. And so they're trying to, rework testing to be more engineering focused. So I think it's definitely in the state of transition as they're trying to get faster, as they're trying to get to modernize. And I think it's somewhat at a crossroads around improving the people, improving the approach, and then also taking a step back and looking at the applications they have themselves to figure out how do they modernize their core platforms that they're using.
Got it. Okay, so just kind of following up on that for a second. You said that a lot of these companies are looking at testing and quote unquote minimizing the role of testing, but that doesn't mean that they're not testing or they're not thinking about testing as important. They're probably just changing their general approach, is my guess. Is they're
Well,
maybe like doing it in a different way. Is that true?
yeah. So maybe I didn't say it right. So um, sometimes, like I've gone to clients, right, and when you talk to them about testing, predominantly they're using some mix of associates with an offshore testing company, and they've really squeezed that testing company, that consulting company, for low cost testing resources. And the problem with that is that they're mostly doing manual testing. Their automation maturity and expertise isn't very great. And so the value they get with testing is low, and then they have to do a lot of UAT testing. So now they're reevaluating all of that and trying to figure out, how do we find more issues up front? How do we do more with automation? And so it's changing the value proposition of testing, but there definitely is some budget constraints and whatnot, because they're so used to paying for a lower cost option.
Well, right, and also as you were saying before, that if speed is of the essence, if velocity is king, manual testing is almost the antithesis of that. Like you're reliant on a manual side of things as opposed to getting to scale that you can with automation. So it's interesting to see that happening. You also, of course, mentioned the one word that, again, given the industry, we kind of have to talk about a minute. That's COVID, right? So one of the things that Doug, the previous speaker, talked about was understanding kind of the why. Like, why are test cases important? Why are things driving or focused on the business outcomes itself? And where he was talking about it was sometimes it's really easy just to kind of go over and sit down with somebody and have a chat, except now we're in times of COVID, where that's not as easy to do anymore. So how are companies that you're seeing adapting to that? Are they bringing in new technologies like Zoom or other types of things to help with that? Are they integrating that into their overall planning? Is that something that you even see in testing, or is that just kind of something ancillary to it?
Yeah, COVID has done a fantastic job of leveling the playing field for companies. So I think every company now has adopted Zoom or Microsoft Teams or WebEx as their norms. I mean, I think everybody spends most of their time in these mediums, and the benefit of that is location doesn't matter. So let's say you're in like the Northeast of the United States, as a healthcare company, you would predominantly only look for resources in that area. So now, as you're trying to build up your engineering talent, people are hiring from across the country. It's helping with the productivity of offshore resources, because now they don't have to worry about like the water cooler conversations that people would make decisions or changes in. So what we're seeing is that like our people offshore are actually even more productive, because everybody is online. Everyone is reliant on, like if you're using Microsoft Teams, dependent on Teams channels and chats and setting up deliberate meetings to coordinate things. And so because of that, you can be much more inclusive of everybody. So I think it's helping give people a better sense of leveraging offshore resources. It's helping them from hiring people, because they can go across the country. So yeah, I mean, it does. I think you're seeing, like, from an agile perspective, definitely people are having to get creative. Like if you're following SAFe and you're doing release planning and you want to have people in a room, that becomes a little bit more challenging. But Zoom, for example, has breakout rooms, so there's definitely a higher a use of the tools. But I think people are pretty comfortable now getting on video, participating, asking questions. I think it's just now the flip side of all of this is that, man, by Friday I'm burned out. And, like you're
Yeah,
always
I'm with you
on,
there.
you're always right. And so I think what people have to start to be better at is carving up time in the day for themselves, right? Like
Yeah.
putting time in the calendar for, okay, I'm not going to start my day till 8:30 or whatever in the morning. I have a dedicated time to eat lunch or try to. I'm going to log off by a certain time and I'm not going to check my emails, right? So you have to get a little bit better at managing your calendar and your time. And you definitely have to like take some mental health breaks because it's just, I used to travel a lot and like now I don't do that. And I'm just here working.
Yep.
And it can be very tiring. But yeah, I
Oftentimes
think
you don't leave that room either, I bet.
no, I just like walk in circles, like back and forth, just to get some exercise.
Exactly. Yeah, it'll be new things where they've put treadmills built into the home office and you just kind of walk around on that kind of a thing.
Absolutely. But again, I think COVID has helped in some ways. I even think like if you're someone who's like questioning your job and you've been limited because in your city there's only a certain number of companies, like this is actually a really good time as a technologist to go look for a new job. And maybe that sounds funny to say, you know, with what else is happening, but good people are still hard to find. And because companies are relaxing the location requirements, you have a lot more flexibility to you. But yeah, I think it's you know, it had some benefits, I guess.
No doubt. I mean, it's funny you say that because you know, I'm lucky in that I'm used to working remote. I've worked remote for most of my time, and I go to the office from time to time. And like you, I travel quite a bit. But all that has a toll. And you know, I've got a family. I got kids that I didn't get to see a whole lot. And one of the benefits of what's happened is that I get to see them now. Sometimes a little too much, but sometimes, you know, it's also good just to kind of have those connections rebuilt. It also probably gives you an opportunity or gives people an opportunity to explore new technologies, you know, learn something new that that they haven't had an opportunity to do before because they've had either you know, time constraints from commuting or being in the office, whatever it might be. And we're seeing at SaaS a fair amount of customers that are on the rise that are using newer technologies, things like, you know, Espresso or XCUI from a native framework standpoint, or looking at how can they get faster by using things like Cypress or Puppeteer or other types of things like that. Do you have a similar experience on your side? Are you seeing those new technologies kind of on the rise, and how are companies adapting to those?
So I think the answer is yes. As clients and companies start to move away from like just thinking about regression automation, these other tools really are more powerful. Cypress or just Espresso or like Appium, the native tools requiring testers to be more like engineers. So this is how you're going to get automation more efficient, running as part of the pipeline. And so you definitely need to spend time looking at these tools. And when we talk about doing transformation, the key is to do pilots and POCs at your company in your technology, because that's how you're going to get people to buy in and start to make the investment. So yeah, absolutely. People are really looking to, you know, how do I add machine learning and AI into my testing to make it more intelligent? There's some frameworks out there like Mabel. What applicability does that have with what they're doing? We have several open source tools. And so, yeah, I think it definitely, if you've managed your time correctly, and the company is trying to modernize, it absolutely is a great time for POCs and experiments with some of these other tools.
Yeah, and there's a question on the Q&A I'm going to read here in a second, because I think it kind of ties into this topic around, you know, not only self-care, you know, mental health being a big thing when you're stuck in a small office and not really able to go and do the things that we've been able to do in the past. Taking advantage of opportunities to explore new skills for yourself, learn new technologies, and maybe innovate a little bit on your own to improve the overall company. I mean, these are all things that we individually can do, but companies also have a role in that as well. And a lot of that kind of comes down to culture, right? What kinds of culture do organizations want to create? around to foster that kind of innovation. So the question in the Q&A is what are the keys to creating a culture of quality at the organizations where your teams have worked or where you yourself have engaged?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to answer this. So we have seen that when companies are trying to drive change, they have a lot of cultural impediments to how they work, which prevents innovation, learning, and quality as being a focus. So the first thing is what metrics are you looking at all? What does leadership really care about? I was at a company, and their whole performance system was based off of project heroics. So they're rewarding people for logging time to projects and helping with those projects. So when someone wants to do something relative to POCs, experimentation, or learning, there's no space for it because everything has to be documented within a project, right? And so the flip side of this, I'm kind of working my way around the answer here, but the first thing is what are those impediments that the company is doing that prevent this? So if you want quality to be a focus, well, how are people getting measured and rewarded? If no one is being fired or penalized because of production outages or productivity, and you're just marching to a date, quality is not going to be very important. The other aspect of it, so being able to identify what are those anti-patterns that are contributing to bad behaviors that maybe go against what the company is saying, right? So the company is saying, hey, we want transformation, we want DevOps, but then they're doing these other things. Identifying those other things and bringing that to leadership and talking about how that negatively impacts what their vision is, that's definitely one way. The other way is helping identify the business case around what poor quality is doing to the company. So take an application and do value stream analysis. So document all of the steps that the team goes through to take a requirement and develop it, test it, push it to production. How long does that take? What are all the steps? What are the cycles between the developers and testers? And when you do that, you can show leadership and the business that because quality isn't important, the teams perhaps are wasting time fixing defects, rebuilding stuff, manually testing. And so the poor quality is contributing to a lack of productivity. So if quality was important, potentially maybe the teams could get 20 to 30% more features in their backlogs, right? So that's tangible results for the business. So you have to be able to show leadership what they're paying for with poor quality in their terms, and then use that to make the case for why you should invest in newer tools, in the training, in different ways of working, and then hopefully have a metric to true back to that leadership cares about. That's the ultimate. I mean, if you're just trying to get on-time project delivery, then quality is going to suffer. But if people really care about productivity and time to market, and you can highlight the cost of poor quality, now you can make quality a big focus of the organization.
So it definitely feels like time to market, velocity is never going to go away. That's always going to be a priority that we have to go forward with. I just from my own background, I know that I have seen customers struggle with figuring out what are the right metrics to go after. In addition to that, that's the easy one, right? Can we get it out to production as fast as we can? The least amount of bugs introduced in production is another fairly easy one. But what are some of the things that maybe healthcare itself can be thoughtful around, that are metrics that they might want to pay attention to that maybe they haven't thought about in the past, that might not necessarily be as obvious? Do you have any ideas on that?
I mean, it is obvious, unfortunately. Depending on your maturity, defect containment is probably the gold standard of quality metrics, especially in healthcare, where most likely you're still doing a lot of UAT testing. Uh, defect containment is probably the one metric that we always go to be able to say, hey, look at the number of defects that are being found outside of testing, and it's a really good barometer of your testing effectiveness. The other one would be automation effectiveness. So you have automation tests, like, are they finding stuff? Because if you have your whole regression suite automated, thousands of test cases, you have a team of people that are supporting it, and they never find anything, like, then it's having zero value. Mm-hmm. And so being able to show that you're finding majority of your defects in testing, being able to show that your automation is having value, it has the right coverage, you know, and then maybe, dare I say it, you know, looking at the efficiency of the team. You know, I get asked at least once a week, if not once a day, about the right ratio between developers and testers. And so just being able to look at the time it takes for testing to occur in relation to development. I'm not going to tell you what the right ratio is, but being able to show that you're making improvements to that, whatever it is for your application, for your architecture. I mean, that is another one that you can use. But ultimately, you're trying to drive improvements in coverage. You're trying to drive improvements with the automation. So as you mature, as you get faster, defect containment isn't as effective as a metric, but it's usually the first one we go to.
Yeah. So we got a tricky follow-up for you on that one, and I'll let you answer it. Rather than focusing in on the ratio between dev and QA, what's the ideal relationship between dev and QA?
They need to be best friends. Yeah, it's surprising that that this is still a topic of conversation. The developer and the tester, we're getting to a point now where testers have to have engineering experience. They have to have the vocabulary that a developer has. I think in healthcare, you see testers that are more subject matter experts than they are engineers. And I think some of that's starting to change, but they need to both be able to talk and understand the application architecture. The tester needs to understand what the developer is doing so that they can be more effective in writing their tests, and especially for automation. And the developer needs to have a sense of what's being tested, because ideally, when as developers developing, they're sitting together, or at least virtually. Maybe that they're trying to run the automation suite or do manual testing in the developer's environment, right? The goal is not to log more defects. The goal is not to let me just break this and log a bunch of defects. If that's, I like to tell people, you should never have to log a defect, because a defect is has zero value. If something doesn't work, the developer should know it right away. So if I'm not working with them closely, they're never going to know. And I'm relying on this other form to communicate. And then as you start to get more mature with automation, you have to understand the architecture and what's changing. I have definitely seen companies that start this transformation and the developers start getting uneasy. Why is my tester asking me questions about the APIs? Or I don't even know about the APIs, or the tester doesn't even know what an API is. So they have to be hand in hand. They have to be very close. The team has to be accountable for quality and working tests, not just the tester. So it's very important, and it's something that it should just be a norm.
You're not suggesting that they actually collaborate, are you?
Absolutely. My favorite one is is when I talk to teams about agility and they tell me that they don't include the testers' work in the story points.
Yeah, I can see that. It's funny because I've had a couple of customers talk to me about how their testing strategy started out with, well, we got to test everything. We test all the things, literally, right? Every use case, every flow, all those types of things. And what they've come back with is that their applications have become so big that half the time they don't know what they're testing anymore. They're just tests that they're just always running. And I think a large part of that is because, to your point, they're not necessarily talking to each other, and they're not necessarily understanding the why of why we need to test. Like what's the outcome of that we're looking for.
Well, I think that
Yeah.
there's two things there. I'm sorry. So I saw a wonderful talk many years ago, and it was about like how you always have to cut your grass and like do your landscaping. And the same thing is true about your automation suite. You always have to go through the tests. You always have to like take out the ones that are flaky, take out the ones that have been there forever that have never failed, right? You always have to take care of it. And then on the coverage side, one of the big emergence in the market is getting to real code level coverage with your tests. So when you talk about test coverage today, we talk about, well, here are the requirements, here's my manual test cases, and so that's coverage. But coverage really is, here's a method in the API that was just modified. Here are the tests that hit that method. And so now we actually know what tests to run. And we could also like hit the other, ancillary tests as part of that. And I think that's where the industry is going, where we have much more intelligence around what tests to run. Do we have real code coverage? And then creating like true quality gates in the CI process that relate to those coverage metrics, just like you would with unit tests.
Yeah, so it turns it away from a developer asking a QA person, give me the bugs so I can go look at them, to actual actionable information that they can say, here are the things that we found. We need to fix these very targeted elements right away.
Yeah, I mean, it's even more, and like the developer could be running the tests locally to see it break. The developer gets notified that those things are broken and what's not working without someone having to log a defect to tell them. So absolutely.
Yeah, totally. And I would assume that you're starting to see, or maybe not even starting to see, an expansion of that type of methodology beyond just looking at it from a point of view of developing, but actually getting into production as well. Are we seeing in production what we thought we would see in pre-production, and how those things merge together or inform more on the monitoring side of things? How does test inform monitoring, and how does monitoring inform test? And are you seeing that kind of a shift as well?
Absolutely. Maybe it's a little less in the healthcare industry. Well, depending on what aspects within healthcare, but absolutely. So, as companies move to the cloud, as you embrace continuous delivery, canary builds, blue-green deployments are critical for companies. So being able to have the right telemetry in production where they can, instead of doing UAT, they can deploy a feature into production. They can limit the user base. They can see how that feature reacts to the consumers. They can, and then based on the right telemetry, they can either roll, turn off that capability because it's not working, and then, patch it later on, or they can decide to roll it out to the rest of the user group. So there's tools like Spinnaker, for example, that Netflix developed that allow you to do that. So absolutely, having the right telemetry, monitoring in production, doing more testing in production is a key capability for clients, as they move to the cloud.
Yeah, and I think it's, to your point earlier, it's important to remember our audience, certainly, and that we're talking about healthcare, and that you started off the session by saying that probably a bit more generically, obviously, than anything targeted, but healthcare is traditionally seen as slower to adopt new technologies. I think is probably the best way to phrase it. But that's always going to be the case. There's always going to be new technologies, and I'm curious, how does EPAM see just the overall focus on mobile apps and mobile app development? How is that impacting how people think about test, and how they actually think about just software development as a whole, specifically in the healthcare environment?
The one thing that it's the immediate thing that I see, or that we see with mobile apps, is that it's giving companies better insight into modern technologies, right? So you have lots of legacy applications, like I mentioned. You go to roll out a new user experience mobile app. And so now you can take better advantage of CI/CD. You can take better advantage of automation and the capabilities that sauce provides, et cetera. And I think the benefit to companies is that they can see this, how it works with the mobile apps, and they can start to apply it to some of the other applications within their portfolio. That's, you know, when I was at Capital One and other companies before that, it's the mobile and the web, the digital line of business, if you will, who's the forefront of technology, but that helps the company get better confidence in automation and moving to the cloud. And then they can start figuring out, okay, how do we start modernizing some of our other applications? How do we maybe re-architect them to be, but it's usually the first place that Agile is adopted. It's the first place where you see DevOps and better test automation. So I think that the mobile area serves as like a catalyst for the rest of the company. If it's done right, if the people, you know, they themselves are people that are trusted, and what happens is it can spur like other experiments within the different lines of business within the company.
Yeah. So you used a key word there, trust. And again, one of the things that Doug was talking about earlier is trust, not only obviously in the people themselves, but in the test strategy and to some degree, obviously the test data itself. We have seen a fair number of customers come to us and say, hey, I need to use production data in my tests. It's got to be the same thing. Especially when you start thinking about it in terms of healthcare, that raises all sorts of eyebrows when it comes to data privacy and security and all sorts of things like that. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just, you got to think it through and be mindful of that. So my question on this one to you is what are you seeing around the best strategy around test data? Do you see people wanting to use production data for that? And is that necessary? Or are there other types of things that we could be doing or that we should be guiding our customers into doing to kind of mitigate any of those risks around data security or privacy?
So it surprises me how many clients and companies that are out there that still have production data in non-prod. It's a lot of people. GDPR across the EU helped, you know, sanitize and sterilize some of that, but in the US, it's prevalent, especially in healthcare. And I would be foolish to tell you that you could get away from prod data 100%. It's probably not the case. So I think for prod data, at the end of the day, you want to limit it. At the end of the day, I want to run automated tests using synthetic data. I need data that I can create at runtime. I can run my tests, and I have a consistent answer. When I can't create synthetic data, then maybe I use something like service virtualization, where I'm able to stub out some of the endpoints, and I don't need to go to a mainframe for claims data, for example, but I can stub out the calls. And there, again, I can use synthetic data to verify that the API or the front end, you know, for a mobile app, I could stub out the APIs and just make sure that the mobile app is changing. So service virtualization has a huge play here from a test data perspective. And then when it comes to prod, at the end of the day, if you're going to use prod data, like I said, it should be a very small subset of what you're doing. You're going to need to have a scrubbed database, like a gold master, if you will. And you're going to have processes around how that's refreshed and kept healthy and up to date. And then you'll need to have a tool that can take subsets of that data and then inject it into non-prod. But that process takes time. So when we talk about continuous testing and DevOps, you really have to rely on synthetic data or service virtualization to make those things happen. And then ideally, if you did have that prod data, maybe it's more in the UAT environment, or maybe it's you're doing some more things in production, like I said, with canary builds, for example, to verify certain use cases and then can react accordingly. But we always go to synthetic data and service virtualization as the first strategy with test data.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. I agree that there are a lot of people out there that still think about it, because I think it's probably what they're most used to and most want to replicate to ensure that the tests are there. But I think you're spot on that being able to kind of control that environment and not introduce additional risks is really important.
Sorry, I think it's the evolution of the role. So if I'm a SME and I'm doing testing, well, I understand that there's certain cases in production that really will help me see whether or not the application is working or not. In order to create synthetic data, I have to understand the database, the relationships, the architecture. And if I'm not a technologist, that's not happening. So the barrier to entry with synthetic data is pretty high. If I'm going to go create a team that's doing that, it could be expensive. So that adds challenges. Whereas like grabbing a sample of production data, scrubbing and subsetting, you can, almost any DBA who knows Informatica can do that.
Right. We have a question in the Q&A. And it fits nicely with where I'm generally going with this as well. So we'll go ahead and introduce it now. So what is the ideal approach to helping organizations with continuous testing transformation? And the second part of that is, what do you see as being the key steps in that journey?
So it is a journey. Continuous testing is the ultimate maturity when it comes to test automation. So for those of you who don't know what continuous testing isn't just test automation. Continuous testing is that everything that you need to test for an application to be certified is automated. It's part of the CI process, and there are automated quality gates that determine whether or not the build can move from one environment to the next. And so to do that transformation, like number one, people need to understand what continuous testing is. You need to be able to have like a current state view of your testing process and how close or how far away are you from continuous testing. You need to have a view on, how would continuous testing look like within that application, your company. And then you really need to have the business case around how is it going to help you? Are you going to be able to get one more release out the door for the year? Are you going to double the number of features? Are you going to cut costs? Like you need to have a business case that's going to compel somebody to spend the money. No business leader in the United States is going to say, here's $1 million to go do something because it's best practice. They're going to do it because it's going to save them money or add money some other place. So you have to be able to put together the business case around how it's going to improve. Like specifically, like you need to document how you're working, and then it's doing the pilots. It's putting it in place maybe in one team, and then maybe creating a SWAT team to help other lines of business, other teams adopt the similar capability. We like to build what we call reference architecture. So having an enterprise framework or enterprise set of frameworks that people can use and tailor to their application stack. And then I could go on and on about testing transformation, but it's you need to provide teams the support to adopt it. You might have to help them do some of the work. And then the testers on the teams, they need to be like engineers in order to support it and do in sprint automation. So it's that discovery piece and putting the business case together, starting small, creating the reference architecture, and then having the infrastructure, if you will, to help support and roll it out across the teams, and having people on the teams who can do that work. Excellent. That was a lot. Right. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's good. It's all good because it actually feeds into two questions I have for you, but we'll ask this one first. Again, it's from our audience. Why does a client prefer a tester should have all the skill set for a single requirement, like ETL testing or backend testing, UI testing, mobile testing? What drives that preference?
Because they're reading too many articles and presentations. Everybody talks about T-shaped engineers, T-shaped testers, people who can do a little bit of everything. And when we talk about agile, we talk about product teams, and a lot of times, a team might have to hit these different capabilities. It's very tough. It's very tough to find somebody who is perfectly T-shaped. Most likely you're going to have somebody who is a back-end tester, and you might have to train them on how to do UI testing or mobile testing. Or maybe it's just leveraging the developers on the team. So I think it's very up and coming now in the industry to ask for software developers and test, people who can do automation, people who can do bug fixing, people who know CI and know the cloud. But the truth of the matter is many companies aren't ready for them. Their teams aren't set up the right way. And I see it more often than not that somebody will look for a person with all of these skills. They bring them onto a team. They only use one of their skills, and then that person ends up leaving because they're bored and unhappy and aren't in the role that they thought they should be in. So I think it's being able to bring somebody in with who's smart, who has a good foundation, who can contribute early, and then allowing them to learn and explore and hit those other areas over time is probably the better option.
Great. All right. So fun question for you. I'm going to give you a magic wand. Ready for it?
Sure.
As it pertains to healthcare, you can change one thing, no matter what it is, one thing in the testing industry or the software delivery industry that will solve all the problems. What's that one thing?
It's probably one tool that supports all of the diverse technologies that people are using. Because I think that's probably one of the issues, because you have this heterogeneous suite of applications that the company has grown up with, mainframes and Windows apps and COTS products. Usually Selenium by itself isn't going to cut it. And that just adds a lot of complexity to everything. So it was nice, like back in the day when QTP and UFT were the standards, and they pretty much supported everything with an add-on. But most companies have moved away from those tools, or if they're still using those tools, they're using them because they still have a Windows legacy product. But I think that would be it. It's just like one tool that kind of covers everything.
Awesome. All right, sir. Well, thank you very much. We're just about out of time. I do want to leave a little bit of time for people to understand how they can best get a hold of you and make sure that they can contact EPAM if they need the help that they're looking for. So anything you want to say around that and kind of guide the folks on that?
Yeah, so just a couple shameless plugs. So part of what we do at EPAM is QA and automation assessments. So if you have automation or you want to help mature what you're doing, or you want to get into automation, we have an assessment service that we provide to come in, look at your application, help bring a framework to bear. We can integrate it with Sauce right out of the gate so that you can be up and running. We can train your people on how to run it. We can help accelerate your maturity for automation. So please feel free to reach out to me. Like I said before, you can find me on Twitter, Bugman31. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you just have questions, I'm really happy to just answer people's questions. You get free consulting. So feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. If you just want to run something by me with an issue that you're facing at your company, I'm always happy just to give some free advice, just as a way to kind of pay it forward. So thank you.